lecture today. And thank you very much, Azmil, and our participants here. Good morning or good evening, depending on the time zone of where you are. Welcome to the online lecture series funded by the Berlin University Alliance with the topic of democracy and religious education in Indonesia. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Mutmaina Syam from Humboldt University of Berlin. I'm PhD students here, and I will be serving as your moderator today. I'm very glad to welcoming Azmil Tayeb, PhD, as our guest lecturer today. Azmil Tayeb is a senior lecturer teaching political science at the University of Science Malaysia in Penang. He is the author of the book Islamic Education in Indonesia and Malaysia, Shaping Minds, Shaping Sound, which awarded us the 2019 ICS Book Prize for College Choice Award. Please use the chat function if you want to ask questions or raise your hands with the raise hands button after the lecture. Without further ado, moving along to our lecture, please welcome Azmil Tayeb, who will speaking on us on Islamic education and multiple facets of Islam in Indonesia. Please, Pak.
Okay, thank you, Ina. Thank you very much. Okay, first of all, yeah, thank you to Saskia and also the Institute of Asian and African Studies at Humboldt for inviting me. So I wish I can give this presentation physically over there. I miss Berlin, I miss Humboldt. As Saskia can tell you how much I love Berlin. But unfortunately, this is the best we can do for now. Yeah, so hopefully when things become quote unquote normal again, then we can travel internationally. I can make my way to Berlin. Which I last visited in 2019, actually, for the Euroseas. Okay, so thank you everyone for participating in this lecture, because we have a few participants here. So I would like to make it a bit informal, so it doesn't have to be so rigid, stuffy, So if people have questions, you can just, like I said, put your question in the chat box, or even raise your hand during the presentation. I don't mind being interrupted. It's okay. So or else we can have the Q&A at the end of the presentation. I'd like to share my slides here, if it's okay. Let's see. Okay, can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So the topic for the lecture today, as you can see on the screen here, Islamic education and multiple facets of Islam in Indonesia. So this actually I like to start off with the reason why I did my research on this particular topic, right? Or how it became my PhD thesis, and later on became a book. So actually, Islamic education in Indonesia is only one half of my research. So the other half, of course, is Malaysia. It's a comparative of Islamic education between Indonesia and Malaysia. So I like to start off with the impetus, I guess, for me to do this research. So it's a little personal anecdote, I would say. So back in 2007, I think almost 15 years ago, so I was teaching English actually at the Pondok Pesantren in South Kalimantan in Matapura. So I was there as a Fulbright fellow. So I was teaching English and doing a bit of research, just to explore ideas, on my PhD, because I plan to continue my PhD. So I wanted to explore ideas, on what to do for my PhD thesis. So I was based at this Pesantren. So as you know, maybe are any of you a graduate of Pesantren here? okay, anyways, so between classes, so we were sitting in the teachers' lounge. So me and all the ustads there, and having our usual teh hangat, we have some of the kueh, lumpia, and all those, all those kueh, and the TV was on, right? So as as Indonesians, that usually in the morning they show the infotainment program, right? So programs like Silat and all those programs like this, celebrity gossip show, right? So that was on on TV that morning. I remember so there was some news about interfaith marriage among this celebrity couple, right? Or they plan to keep their faith, when they get married, which is, as you know, in Indonesia, it's not allowed, right? So you either have to convert to either partners, faith, right? So that was the news, right? And then and suddenly the ustads stopped talking, and then they were focusing on the news, and they all started to discuss about this interfaith marriage, right? So is it okay? Is it not okay? So and then there's this variety of ustads there as well. There's some more conservative, there's some more moderate, or even progressive. So there's a good mix, good ideological mix, I would say, among the ustads there. And I was there as a Malaysian, and it was quite a unique sight, to see, right? To experience, I guess, because you would never find this kind of exchanges, in Malaysia, or particularly in a conservative environment of an Islamic school. It's something that's really, I mean, it's I cannot imagine this kind of discourse would take place, in an Islamic school in Malaysia. So, but there it was, in a pondok pesantren in Matapura, South Kalimantan, right? So that gave me the idea of what kind of Islamic education that allows for this kind of exchanges to take place, this kind of environment, right? Compared to Malaysia. So that was the start of the research, basically, so basically the impetus for my PhD thesis later on, and to see what are the differences. Okay. So so that was the start of this thing, to looking at, I mean, even though both Malaysia and Indonesia have a sizable Islamic education component, in the national education system, but they couldn't be any more different, right? So but here I'm merely focusing on Indonesia. Okay. Okay, so before I go into the presentation, just to give you a bit of overview of what's going to be covered in this lecture. So just first, maybe I don't have to go deep into this, because I guess all of us here are quite well versed in Indonesia. Maybe some of you also studied in Indonesia, so you know the education system there. So, but just to give an overview of what it looks like, and also a brief discussion on on Islamic orthodoxy, and or the lack thereof, in Indonesia, at least compared to Malaysia, right? So which has very strong Islamic orthodoxy and very dominant, yeah. So unlike in Indonesia, and how it relates to Indonesia in Islamic practices and education in Indonesia. And also and later on we move to the discussion on the 3 factors that actually shape Islamic education and public discourse in Indonesia. What I've mentioned earlier, right? So what actually allows this kind of climate of discourse, this kind of relative openness, when it comes to the diversity of opinions or even Islamic interpretations to coexist, right? And then I will give an example from the textbook itself, the textbook that was that's produced by the Ministry of Religious Affairs, Kementerian Agama, for senior high schools in Indonesia. And also, I will talk a bit about the Muslim middle class as well, the rising Muslim middle class in Indonesia, particularly the Sekolah Islam Terpadu, SIT, Integrated Islamic Education, which is quite popular amongst upper middle class Muslims, in urban areas especially, or Greater Jakarta, where you can find a lot of these private schools, right? The Bekasi, Tangerang, those places, Depok, yeah. And also finally, I will give 3 examples to showcase the diversity among Islamic schools in Indonesia. You can see there are quite variety. I mean, these schools might be outliers. They might not be representative of the schools, the tens of thousands of Islamic schools that you can find in Indonesia. But it shows, there are diversity. There are space for schools that sort of non-conventional, right, to coexist, right? So as opposed to, let's say, Malaysia, because you can see this type, the examples that I showed, this kind of schools would not exist in Malaysia. They would be probably burned down or shut down by the government. So just to show that how these schools can even exist, not just exist, but prosper, right? Okay, let's move on to the overview of Islamic education. So just, you can see one interesting fact about Islamic schools in madrasah and pesantren in Indonesia, they're all private, right? 95% of them are private, even though all of them are actually registered with the Ministry of Religious Affairs. And there is a department, yeah, in the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Kementerian Agama that actually where these schools are registered, and they look up the school, even provide funding as well. But 95% actually privately owned, right? Either by individual kiai, for example, yeah, or a foundation, yayasan, but they are privately owned. And this stands in stark contrast to Malaysia, where it's actually the exact opposite. Most of the schools are actually owned or directly administered by the federal government. So this complete opposite. And there's also the private school like Sekolah Islam, which includes sekolah the SIT, yeah. Sekolah Islam Terpadu, which actually registered under the Kemendikbud, yeah? So Ministry of Education and Culture. So there's a department there where registered all the private schools, but the curriculum, because SET has a different curriculum, yeah. So we will go on, we will look at in detail later on. And it has to be approved by both ministries. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, religious orthodoxy. So I find this quite interesting because, because as a Malaysian, as someone who grows up in Malaysia, I mean, we just, orthodoxy is what we see and what we live, what we experience every single day here. You cannot escape the Islamic orthodoxy here, particularly, JAKIM, the central religious authority here. It just consumes all aspects of our life here, and to the extent that, I mean, there are surveys done to show that Muslims in Malaysia believe that only one interpretation of Islam can exist, which is the official interpretation of Islam, the one that actually propagated by the orthodoxy itself. Yeah. So in Indonesia, you don't find similar religious orthodoxy as you see in Malaysia, for example. Yes, I mean, you have a body like MUI, the Indonesian Ulama Council, that claims to be the authority when it comes to Islamic affairs, but it does not have the kind of power that its counterpart in Malaysia has. And we will go on that a bit more in the later slides. Yeah, so yeah, MUI has certain powers, when it comes to food, for example, the issuing the halal certification, but it does not have, the kind of overreaching, deep-reaching power as its counterpart in Malaysia. So if you look at here, some of the definition of orthodoxy, And also, to me, the Hamid Dabashi definition is certainly rings true, because orthodoxy can only be orthodoxy if it succeeds politically, right? So it has political success, right? You cannot claim to be an orthodoxy when you don't have the political power to enforce your ideals, your beliefs, onto the society itself, right? So it is the political success, of a given interpretive reading that renders a religious position orthodox, right? So there is a political component to orthodoxy. It's not simply a theological matter. So it is, there's a political aspect of it that's really important that actually differentiate, the kind of orthodoxy you see in Indonesia versus what you see in Malaysia. Okay. So now we go to the basically to the heart of my research, I guess, my book. Yeah. So basically my argument. So the three factors that shape the nature of Islamic education and public discourse in Indonesia. So the first factor is the institutional ideology and objectives. So institutional here refers to the Ministry of Religious Affairs and also the Ministry of Education and Culture. I mean, the two ministries that, and also Indonesia Ulama Council. Yeah. So the three institutions that that has some influence, some oversight over, how over the Islamic education and the practices. And the second factor is the patterns of social Islamization. So as we know, in the late 70s, early 80s, and in Indonesian case is the late 80s, there is a wave of Islamization. Yeah? So you can see rising piety among Muslims in Indonesia, especially since the late 80s. Yeah? But for some reason, it does not affect the government policy. So there is no effort from the Orde Baru regime, from Suharto, to control Islamic discourse, to co-opt Islamist opposition. I mean, he did, obviously, but beyond that, there's not much, especially when it comes to Islamic education. There's barely any effort from the regime to shape Islamic education in a way that it supports the regime, right? So, not like what's happening in Malaysia. You see, because what Mahathir did was, to gain control of Islamic discourse, including Islamic education, and shape it, in a way that it supports the regime, his regime. And the third factor is the center-periphery relations, which actually is quite important in Indonesian case because, as we know, Indonesia is a highly decentralized country. Especially after 1999, the decentralization laws. So a lot of the functions of the central government were transferred to the subnational governments, to the province and to kabupaten, and below. So in the case of Islamic affairs, and by extension Islamic education, that is not it's not the function that was decentralized, right? So it remains within the jurisdiction of the central government, right? So, but in practice, you see Islamic education is highly centralized, right? I mean, there are different ways that Islamic education were carried out. Or were taught, practiced in different parts of Indonesia, because I also did my research in Aceh, I did my research in Kupang, in NTT. There's vast differences, so there is no centralized control from the ministries, especially Ministry of Religious Affairs, even though it is supposed to be part of the part of the jurisdiction of the central government. Okay. So this is the first factor, right? So so there is no ideological cohesion, when it comes to how the government wants to handle Islamic affairs, right? Or shape Islamic education to fit its prerogatives, right? So its objective to give legitimacy to the regime so that it can stay in power. So there is no such effort, in Indonesia then, right? So especially when it comes to the when you look at at the ministerial level, right? There's been this tension, between, in fact, there's fragmentation instead of cohesion. There's fragmentation, ideological fragmentation, because both the Ministry of Religious Affairs and the Ministry of Education and Culture, especially during Orde Baru, they have different objectives, right? And they're driven by different ideology as well, so you have the Ministry of Education and Culture, which was back then was more secular. Maybe some of you still remember, the former Minister Daud Yusof, and some of these controversial moves, to what were those things? I can't remember, the to disallow
Hello, Pak Azmil. Looks like
seems like we lost the connection there.
looks like we lost the connection here. We will try to.
We'll just have to wait for him to find the way back to our room. This is one of the disadvantages of digital meetings and communication, that speakers can just suddenly drop out. I just saw him come back though. Wasn't he there just now? There he is.
Yep. Let me make as a host.
Yeah, exactly. You'll have to.
Yeah.
There you're back.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah.
Let me share the screen again. Okay. So yeah, so there instead of ideological cohesion, there is a ideological fragmentation, between these two ministries, right? So during the Suharto time, you can see one of the main controversies, I would say, the single roof education issue. Maybe some of you are familiar with this. There's an attempt from the Ministry of Education and Culture to combine all schools under one roof, right? So the roof meaning the Ministry of Education and Culture, right? So of course the Ministry of Religious Affairs didn't agree to this. Is encroaching on its jurisdiction. So there, and also of course the Islamic organizations, NU, Muhammadiyah, were all opposed to this idea of single roof education. So there's this different objective, different ideology as well, right? Because Ministry of Education and Culture back then, known to be more secular. You have someone like Daud Yusof, for example, who's known to make some controversial statements, I guess, And so there's this different, there's no cohesion, right? So there's no uniformity when it comes to what the government or the objective of the state as a whole, so especially how to shape the Islamic education itself to fit the objective of the government, the state, right? So unlike what you see in Malaysia. Even when it comes to MUI itself, as we know, MUI during the Suharto time is fully co-opted, right, by the regime, and it's only only after 1998 when they try to kind of to brand themselves again, as someone who's more independent, So, but for the longest time, they're known as stempel pemerintah, so so there's no clear role, or objective for NUE, and they were not given the power as well, to enforce what they believe to be how Islam should be practiced in Indonesia, and MUI also tend to be more on the conservative side as well, compared to, let's say, NU and Muhammadiyah, but unlike JAKIM in Malaysia, which has full authority given by the government to enforce its brand of Islam, or its orthodoxy, right? Its orthodox values. The same cannot be said for MUI. So this is the first factor why you can see this kind of open landscape, when it comes to Islamic education compared to the more controlled one that you find in Malaysia. Let's see. Okay. The second factor is patterns of social Islamization. As I mentioned earlier, especially since the late 80s in Indonesia, so there's a rising piety amongst the Muslims, especially Muslim middle. There's also, it goes hand in hand with this rising, this growing group of Muslim middle class too. So as we know, the Suharto regime is very development focused, right? So and you can see this development policies and kind of in a way open up opportunities, for many people to attend universities, and open up more opportunities for white collar jobs, for example, and you can see the migration, rural urban migration, and all those things, that were happening. So you can see this sort of kind of wave of Islamization in a way that you can see not just in Indonesia, but you can see in other countries as well. Malaysia, for example, which is earlier than Indonesia, but the same kind of dynamics that you see, But the difference is that this wave of Islamization or rising Islamic piety did not affect the regime, unlike what happened in Malaysia. So basically, what it means is that the regime, the Suharto regime, did not change its strategy, when it comes to dealing with this Islamic political Islam, for example. So basically, there are two ways, right? When the Suharto, how Suharto dealt with the political Islam. First is to co-opt them, right? If possible. If it's not possible, then you crush them, or he crushed them, right? So you can see, the only Islamic party back then, P3, ISMI, MUI, they're all co-opted by the regime, right? And then, you have other more militant hardline groups, like Commando Jihad, for example, all were crushed, right?
Azmil, excuse me, since we are quite limited with the time, can you
please
a little bit faster? Yeah.
The Q&A right now? I thought we're doing 1.5 hours.
Not yet. Yeah. A little bit condensed with the lecture, and we will jump to the Q&A because we have 31 hour left.
It's okay because my time shows only half an hour right now.
Yeah,
So yeah, okay, all right.
Give
Yeah, just let me know how much time I have left right now.
maybe 10-15 minutes, Pak.
10-15 minutes. Wow, okay. That's always the problem when you present, right? So it's always had to go exceed the time, and then we're rushing towards the conclusion. Okay, so I'll just go quickly, to the center periphery relations. As I mentioned before, even though Islamic education, Islamic affair is part of the central government jurisdiction, but in reality, Islamic education is decentralized. You can see because I spent time in NTT, for example, looking at Islamic education there. I visited schools, madrasah, pesantren in NTT, in Kupang, and it's so different, like they have pastors teaching there, I mean, even one pesantren in one madrasah actually in Flores actually has the head of the school is actually a pastor, like not a pastor, like a Christian guy, a teacher, so which you don't see in other parts of Indonesia, right? Definitely not in Jawa or Sumatra or Aceh, and also there's funding dispute between Mora and MB because it's not clear, right? So the Kemendikbud claimed that funding should come from Kemenak, but Kemenak said we don't have enough money. There's so many Islamic schools out there, madrasah, tens of thousands of them. We don't have enough money to give them funding. So because education is actually decentralized, right? So it's all you have the it's under the province and sub-province. So there's dispute, right? So in places where like Aceh or West Java, which is more strong Islamic identity, then you have a lot of funding for Islamic schools, right? But if you go to places like NTT or East Indonesia, where Muslims are the minority, and then so there's very little, if any, funding for Islamic schools from the local government. Yeah, so. Yeah, so this is an example from the textbook, from the PAE textbook for senior high school. So it states clearly here, right? So that this is actually the official view from the ministry, saying that so there's a freedom of religion, no compulsion. So there's multi-tafsir, so all these things, right? So even in at least officially in the textbook, it states, that there is space for different views, different interpretation to coexist. So I think I can skip this one, so this is the rising middle class that we see in Indonesia, excuse me, since the late 80s. And then which actually, so many of them actually, let's say this rural urban migration, they attended universities, mainly in the urban areas, in Jogja, in Jakarta, in Bogor, that, yeah, ITB, UI, UGM, yeah. So then actually there's the dakwah group, that existed on campus back then, so Jemaah Tarbiyah, which is the predecessor to PKS, the political party, right? So back then they were active on campus because they're not seen as political, and they're also not seen to be affiliated with other mass Islamic organization, unlike HMI or PMII, which affiliated with either Muhammadiyah or NU. And they're very active in non-religious public universities, like UI, UGM, ITB. So they're not very active at UIN or EIN, because those people come from a pesantren background. They have strong religious understanding and grounding, so they're not easily influenced, I guess, by the dakwah group compared to those who attend the non-religious public universities. I will go, okay, here. So there's an explanation for that too, because like Robert Hefner, he says that for these people who migrate, from rural to urban areas, they're in a way, they're culturally displaced, right? Because you go from one surrounding where you have your anchor, you settled in, you have your community support, and then suddenly you uprooted, you go to urban area to study, and you're drifting, you feel like there's no direction, there's no orientation, so it actually appeals. So this group, the Dakwah group, especially Jamaah Tarbiyah, is very appealing to them in this sense, because it provides them with that kind of anchor, so they're more receptive towards this Dakwah movement, right? So, and also Kunto Wijoyo also talks about this Muslim middle class, what they actually, they're not political, but they're focusing more on mainly these three things, Islamization of knowledge, for the government to instill Islamic values in its development policies, and also to make the environment more conducive for Islamic practices, like having musalla in office or on campus and things like that, to facilitate their prayers. So, so this group, Jamaah Tarbiyah, and later on became PKS, using tarbiyah or education as one of their strategies for recruitment, for kaderization, kaderisasi. So, and it comes from the playbook of Ikhwan, so, and we see the same thing in Malaysia also, by similar group like PKS, Jamaah Tarbiyah, using the same strategy. But this is stated clearly even in PKS book, you can find this strategy. So basically, it's just the end goal is to place their people in strategic positions within the government and also in private sector that can influence policy making and shape the society, because the ultimate goal is to Islamize the society, right? So you need to have to place these people in strategic positions, within the government or in private sector, for them to be able to do that. So these are some of the methods used for the kaderization of the indoctrination of these values, right, in the school. I do spend quite a bit of time in SET in Depok. So, and I do observe this kind of, things as well. I mean, it's actually quite open. What they do, it's not a secret, So this is what they do as a way to instill these values, these organizational values from such a young age, right? And parents tend to keep their students within this educational pipeline, so they enter SDIT, and then the SMPIT, and then SMBIT, so the whole basically, and then by the time they enter university, they already internalize these values, right? Because they spend all the schooling years from primary to secondary, within this SET ecosystem, right? Okay, so the final part of my presentation. Oh, thank goodness. So I'm just going to give three, like I mentioned, three examples of the variety that you can see when it comes to Islamic education in Indonesia. Yes, of course, these are all outliers. They're not representative of the Islamic education or Islamic schools, madrasah, pesantren in Indonesia, because there are tens of thousands of them. Most of them are moderate or somewhere in the middle, right? But I'm just giving an example to show how unique and how this kind of open landscape that allows for these types of school to exist and even prosper. So one, of course, the infamous Pondok Pesantren Al Mukmin in Roki, Solo, which we all know produced some, the people who were involved in the bombings in Bali, in Jakarta, the Marriott bombing, the Ritz-Carlton and all those, so quite notorious for that. Founded by, of course, the Abu Bakar Bashir, who's I don't know if he's still in prison or has he been released now. Yeah, and then it's actually quite, you can see, it has 1,300 students, so it's actually doing quite well, so not too bad, for a school with that kind of notorious reputation, right? Even I remember after the Bali bombing, the deputy president at the time, Hamzah Has, whatever, came to the school, right? And he said, I see no terrorists here. So that's what he said, right? So publicly. So yes, I mean, pesantren with a notorious reputation and still around and doing quite well by the look of it, you know. And second, we have the Pondok Pesantren Waria Al-Fatah, which is in Jogja. So it caters to trans women, founded by Shinta Ratri, so a trans woman activist. You can see in the picture here. So a lot of the trans women are also commercial sex workers. So it helped them to get them off the street and to provide the kind of counseling and guidance and things like that, right? So, and even admitted 4 Christian trans women, and then having a volunteer pastor from Universitas Kristen Duta Wacana, to teach at the school. And finally, we have this one example from Aceh, in Melabo, Aceh. So Daya Diniyah Darussalam. So founded by Tengku Umi Hanisa. Here you can see in the picture. So as some of you might know, Tengku is a title given for a religious scholar in Aceh, right? So you need to earn the title Tengku. And she's obviously an Islamic scholar who's qualified to teach, right? In a Daya, or Daya, which is a pesantren, in Aceh, right? So. And then the first pondok school in Aceh established and led by a woman, so which is quite an accomplishment in itself, right? So especially considering how conservative Aceh can be, right? And then it caters towards children who are victims of domestic sexual violence. Actually, it started to cater first during the conflict, the separatist conflict. So a lot of children were traumatized or maybe lost their parents, and so the school took care of these children. So now, after the conflict ended in 2005, 2006, and then so now it shifted the focus towards kids who are victims of domestic and sexual violence. And also, she doesn't just stop there, right? So she initiated Forum Ulama Perempuan, which is based in Aceh, and that trains and send out, more than 400 religious scholars across the province, to educate women about polygamy, domestic sexual violence, child marriage, and all these things, So she's doing a really great job there in Aceh. So, okay, so that's the end of my presentation today. So here you can, if you're interested in a PDF copy of my book, you can email me. So please don't tell Routledge that I'm sharing the PDF copy of my book. But can email me for that. And also there's a forthcoming publication as well on pondok education, pluralism, and public discourse. So with that, thank you very much. And I look forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Pak Azmil. I apologize, need to rushing you.
No problem, no problem. It happens every time during a conference. So Saskia can attest to that because I've been in the same panel with her quite a few times.
Yeah, I believe with this very interesting topics, there's a lot of questions arises. That's why I will also open the Q&A sessions. If you have any questions, please go to the chat, or if you want to share it directly, you can raise your hand with the button. Is there any questions? If not, then I will try to capitalize. Okay, we'll see Saskia there. Please, Saskia first.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ina, I would have, thank you, Azmil. Thank you for running us through this very complicated landscape and for keeping the comparative lens there for us. It really brings some points about each country into sharper relief if you contrast them in this way. I'd be grateful if you could elaborate a little bit more on the actors. So you have mentioned the very diverse and changing landscape of actors in the Indonesian case. In the book, you often discuss local educational authorities. I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about them, especially concerning the connection between the PKS and the integrated Islamic schools.
Okay.
Has this have they been handed over, or have there been other groups that are interested in using this funding gap or this funding debate? What other actors have been arising in recent years? And connected to this, if you could make the topic of competition a bit more explicit. So there's competition all over your book between the different authorities, but in our recent discussions in our work group, we've been focusing a lot on this, especially given the recent work by Alexander Pelletier, the discussion of radicalization through competition, through the pressure, and how this plays out, especially given that there are more and more debates about the neoliberal tendencies of the education, the global education system, really something that we can observe in almost every society. So yeah, these two, new actors and the topic of competition, if you could elaborate a little bit on that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, when it comes to competition, right? I mean, this is actually, this is the exact term used by the guy, from the integrated Islamic school. When I interviewed him, he said he's actually the head of the Jaringan Sekolah Islam Terpadu, JSIT. So he's a professor at the university, private university Jakarta. They say like, yeah, this is it's part of this competitive education landscape, because they realize that, they have to compete with, not just other, like private Islamic schools. Like there are the more established ones in Jakarta, like Al-Azhar, or there are quite a few that caters, towards not just the middle class and upper middle class Muslims in the greater Jakarta area, but also competing with, like to be seen as a legitimate Islamic school that people, like how people see pesantren, so you have that kind of legitimacy, that people say, oh, this is the place to study Islamic, to study Islam, Islamic subjects. So so he looks at it as this, so his ultimate goal actually, back then, like he was telling me that, yeah, we want to be recognized, we want our curriculum to be recognized, so that when people look at us, we're there, we're like a legitimate school in a way, so I think because it's a constant struggle, for them, because you have to juggle between these Islamic values and also the aspiration of this middle class, upper middle class families, who want the best for their kids, because it's not simply about equipping them with this religious knowledge. It's also about preparing them, for university later on. So there's this pressure, this expectation that the kids that attend SIT, they have to go to all the best universities. They have to go to UGM, they have to go to UI, or even go overseas. So there's which you don't see in maybe like in the pesantren, for example, right? Maybe the expectation is you go and continue your study in Al-Azhar, or maybe you go to Jordan, or to Arab Saudi or whatever, but the middle class, upper middle class, they have different expectation, right? So so that's that kind of competition, but as well, especially to justify the kind of fees that they charge too, So as we all know, these schools, they're expensive, right? They're not financially accessible to most, especially considering the average income of an Indonesian family, right? So there definitely like one SET that I visited in Depok, you know, it charged like the entrance fee, wang muka, you know, like 20 million rupiah, right? I mean, that's on the low side, you know. I mean, I've heard there are other private Islamic school that charge even like 50 million, you know, 30 million, and then monthly fees, you know, this one is 1 million, right, per kid, right? So if you have 3 kids, you send all to the same school, they're already 3 million. I mean, that's on the low side, you know. It can be like 3.5 million. I know one friend who sent a kid to one of these private Islamic school, pay 3.5 million per month, you know, for the kid, right? So so there's that as well. You know, you have to justify the kind of cost, and then also the reputation, you know, that you can not just succeed when it comes to religious knowledge, education, but also succeed in more secular, you know, education that allows these students, you know, to go to, you know, like top universities in Indonesia or abroad. So so there's that kind of competition, you know. And then when you talk about the local authorities and the actors, you know, I find it quite interesting as well, you know, because I did my research also in the provinces, right? So I went to NTT, I went to Aceh, so I spent quite a bit of time in these two places. You can see how, especially in NTT, which is very interesting dynamic, you know, because even the people who work at the Kantor Wilayah Agama, right, in Kupang, I mean, they don't necessarily follow orders from the central ministry. You know, they're like, you know, we're different here. We have different culture. You know, we're much more open. We're not as hardline, as conservative as people in Java or in Sumatra. You know, even the schools that I visited in NTT, you know, they're like, yeah, we rather have Christian teachers teaching in madrasah, in the pesantren, than having Muslim teachers from Java, from Sumatra to come and teach. Yeah, because their justification is that, you know, because these people, I mean, because they're more into suku, right, into tribes, you know. So so they're like, so these people understand our culture. They might have different religion, but they come from the same tribe, same suku, you know. So they prefer that rather than having fellow Muslim teachers to come from Java, you know, and from you know, to teach there. And also, I find another thing quite interesting is that the power dynamic, the power related in the, I guess, the imbalance power relations, you know, there, because obviously Muslim is the minority. So sometimes they have to conform to the Christian dominated culture there, you know. So some of the Kantor Wilayah, the Kanwil Agama officials, you know, in Kupang, they grumble to me, I guess, they in private, I guess, you know, saying that yeah, you know, we're the minority here. Sometimes these people can be insensitive to Muslims. You know, they would have events like during Jumatan, or they have events during Maghrib or something like that, you know. So we have to go, and then we have to miss our prayer because we have to attend these events, you know. So they're not very sensitive to our needs. Yeah, but what can we do? You know, we live in a Christian majority community, so things like that. So they do, you know. So there are this kind of tensions, this kind of, you know. Yeah, but I find it quite interesting because, yeah, because there is barely any supervision from the central government, you know, especially in Kupang, you know. So like even though when I asked the people in Kementerian Agama, they say, oh, you know, it's Muslim, only Muslims supposed to teach in the schools, you know. But then on the ground, when you go to NTT, obviously you see that's not being enforced. So I find it quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Azmil. Yeah, another questions from Lisa.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, Ina, and also the presentation. That's very interesting. So I have two questions here, and then it's still related to what Saskia already asked. And first is that I was wondering when I read about the SIT, the Sekolah Islam Terpadu, and where are the school of, you mentioned already about Muhammadiyah and NU also as the biggest organization in Indonesia, and they also own a lot of institutional education. And then especially I think in rural areas, Muhammadiyah and NU provides a lot of schools there, but to contrast it with Sekolah Islam Terpadu, where are they actually in the map here, the schools of Muhammadiyah and NU, especially in urban areas? And then the second is the question also about the local authorities there in province or sub-province. You mentioned already in your book that, for example, the teacher that teach in Sekolah Islam Terpadu, their background actually, their educational background actually from public universities. And how about these local authorities? Like, can you tell us more maybe about the educational background of the local authorities there that you came across? Thank you very much.
Okay. Can you say which local authority? I mean, local authorities. I mean, what local authorities?
I mean the people in the province, the local province, the governor, and then that overlook, or the Dinas Pendidikan maybe in Kupang that you mentioned.
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so SET is, like I said, it mainly caters towards middle class, upper middle class Muslims, and these are usually mainly professionals. They work white collar jobs. They're quite well off, because obviously you have to, because you pay so much, for the school. So so you can find a lot of them in suburban areas, I would say, right? So in the Greater Jakarta area, you can find in Depok, in Bekasi, Tangerang, so you can find a lot of them. And usually one, I guess, good but maybe unscientific indicator is that, you can see places where PKS is doing very well. You can usually find many of the schools, many of the SETs, because, I mean, there's a reason why people call it Sekolah PKS, right? Even though SET people or teachers, they always deny that we are not PKS school, but that, of course, I mean, they're not directly established by PKS, but when you look at the foundations, the yayasan that established the school, I mean, they're all filled with PKS people, so you have to dig a bit deeper, so of course, when you look at the school's website and all this thing, you don't see any affiliation with PKS, it's not obvious. Even when I interview the head of the Jaringan Sekolah Islam Terpadu, JSIT, and he, a few times, he like almost angrily denies, like, we are not, kami bukan sekolah PKS, not like what everyone said. But when you look, you have to be a bit more investigative, I would say, just go look at which yayasan established schools, and you look, deeper into this yayasan, you see who sit on the board, you can see like either current DPR member, from PKS, or former DPR or former DPRD, member from PKS, all full of PKS people, So that's a good reason why it's called PKS, Sekolah PKS, right? So I would say yes. I mean, mostly because obviously they cannot compete, they cannot open in rural areas, for example. I mean, first, I mean, that's not their target demographic. Because I mean, who can pay that much? 1-2 million per month. 20 million for Wang Muka. Only certain areas, I guess, in Indonesia can afford that kind of fees, right? And second, they're not going to open, let's say, in Jawa Timur, for example, right? I mean, there are so many pesantrens there. You're going to be competing with NU pesantren, so obviously that's not their target market, right? So their target market is this Muslim professionals, who live in the Greater Jakarta area, or maybe some other urban areas as well. Right? So yeah, and then when it comes to local authorities, I didn't really look at their background, for example, but I did. I asked the Kementerian Agama official in Jawa Barat, actually. So in Bandung, because the Depok, all those places, they're in Jawa Barat, and then I asked, so what do you think of SET? Because it has to be their curriculum, the integrated curriculum has to be approved by the Kementerian Agama and also by Kemendikbud. So both have to approve their integrated curriculum. So they say, oh, we like it. We like SET because I think it's good to have more Islamic schools in Indonesia, especially good Islamic schools. So they actually support, SET. So there's no reason that there's no really hostility, I guess I would say, against SET. So maybe except for those who don't like PKS, maybe, but yeah, but when it comes to the officials, they say there's no real, hostility. So yeah, and like you said, so they recruit amongst themselves, as I mentioned in my book, right? So like the teachers, for example, it's almost like exploitation, if you ask me, because the teachers get paid really low, and the teachers are usually alumni from UI or from other these public universities, yeah. So, but they were already involved in the Dakwah organization on campus, and they're doing it for ideological reason, so that's why they're willing to take the low pay. So yeah, and then because I did ask the principals that, we don't pay that much, they're doing it because they really believe in the movement, they believe in what we're doing, so it's like, this is another way of saying that we're actually exploiting cheap labor. So yeah, so that's what happens.
Yeah, thank you very much for the answer. Any other questions? If not, I actually have several or a lot of questions, but let me ask to a bit first. You argue that the current decentralization nature of Islamic education in Indonesia is not only allow for moderate values, right, but also for the conservative and orthodoxy values.
Yeah.
So do you think it is necessary or better for the state to have more control on education, like what you argue in like in the or like in Malaysia as well? Or is there any alternative way for us such a very high polarized and decentralizations educations as Indonesia? Because I also have my focus of my current research is on education in Indonesia, and I also compare the textbooks from Mora and also the private textbooks, and I found that the private textbooks are very high conservatives, even have a tendency for a global Islamic movement. How do you think of this? And I also have a few questions later if the time.
Yeah, shoot away those questions. To me, yes, I mean, there's, of course, they're always good and bad, right? But I personally prefer the way that Islamic education in Indonesia is being organized right now. Yes, of course, I mean, there has to be maybe a bit more control, because when you say, yes, I mean, the textbook, the example I gave, that one is from there's an official textbook, right? But of course, the private one, and even the teachers as well, right? Because PPAM did this research a few years ago. PPAM in UIN Jakarta did this, looking at the radicalism among the teachers and also the textbook, right? And they found it's very concerning, very worrying, right? Because the teacher, they're harboring all these extremist thoughts, so that's actually a genuine concern, because that's the downside of having this kind of open, landscape of an open educational landscape, right? Yeah. So obviously there has to be, maybe yeah, I don't know, rightly or wrongly, you can see how the Jokowi administration has been cracking down on HTI or maybe on FPI recently. Maybe that's that's one way, I guess, to maybe to curb this kind of extremist trend, right, that you see, or maybe to have a bit more monitoring, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I know it's highly debatable, because at the same time, you want to have this kind of free space for discourse, for different. Yeah, but where do you draw? I mean, it's a question of free speech as well, right? So I mean, this is always a conundrum, how you balance, this kind of free speech and also hate speech, where you draw the line. So if the teacher harboring extremist thoughts, do you consider this teacher actually an extremist? Or I mean, or I mean, so I don't know. I mean, it's a very tricky question to say, but definitely I don't want something like in Malaysia, because there's too much control, and too strict, there's no room for differences in opinions, in interpretations. I think that's worse, if you ask me. So, and you being forced actually, to only follow, one interpretation of Islam, when we know there are multiple interpretations, different ways. Even we have 4 mazhabs, and all these things, but for some reason in Malaysia, there's only one way, to practice Islam, which is surprisingly, I mean, a lot of Muslims in Malaysia believe. I mean, I've done research in Malaysia before. It's like interviews, I think it's like 10 years ago. Just interviewing, talking to random people on the streets, Malay Muslims, right? Like one of the questions is like, do you believe there can be differences in interpretations in Islam? An overwhelming number of them say no, right? So there can only be one version of Islam, and obviously that one version is what we practice in Malaysia, or what's being propagated by the Orthodoxy in Malaysia. So that's the, to me that's worse, than I'd rather have the kind of more open landscape that you have in Indonesia compared to very close and very repressive kind of environment that we see in Malaysia right now.
Yeah, come to the second question about the contradiction between Mora and Ministry of Education, because you also elaborate that there's a kind of competitions and also contradictions, both of national level and in a local level, like the budgetary and curriculum and policy. Can we hear more about that and how it will affect the landscape of Indonesian education?
Yeah, I think they have different objectives, right? Different prerogatives, these two institutions. And it was even clearer back during Suharto's time, because especially the pendidikan satu atap, the single roof education. But now you see less of that kind of tensions, but you see it's more of like a systemic kind of actions, but tensions, excuse me, especially when it comes to funding, because like I said, it's like bolak-balik, like keep passing the ball to each other, because some schools, they're asking for because education is decentralized, right? So now it's the responsibility of the Dinas Pendidikan at the provincial level, right? So, I mean, they're the ones who give funding to all the schools, bantuan operational sekolah, all those things, right? Of course, when the Islamic school, pesantren or whatever, ask their Dinas Pendidikan, say, can we get some of this money as well? We also have, things that we want to do to repair this, And it's like, go ask the Kementerian Agama, you're under Kementerian Agama. It's not our responsibility to give money to you, right? So, and of course, Kementerian Agama say, no, we have no money. so the schools are stuck in between. Right? So actually, there's one case like some years ago that were brought up to the Constitutional Court, if I'm not mistaken, like this funding dispute. But then I think the ruling said that the Dinas Pendidikan has to provide at least funding to the school, but of course it's not enforced. So it depends on the province, so right now, like I said, if you're in the schools are in Aceh or in Jawa Barat, or in Sumatra Barat or something, it's more like the strong Islamic identity, then the Islamic schools tend to get money from the Dinas Pendidikan. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, if the schools are in NTT, for example, or in Papua, somewhere there, then it's, yeah. Even though I did ask the Bapeda people in Kupang, so do you give money to Islamic schools there, in NTT? They say, oh yeah, we do, occasionally, but not regularly. It's more like one hibah or something, so it's just like, and then but he didn't tell me how much as well, so like, yeah, we give sometimes, maybe before election, I guess, maybe, I don't know, but yeah, but it's not regular. It's not like, let's say, if you're more like where Muslims are more dominant, yeah, then you get more funding. So there's this kind of inequality when it comes to fund disbursement to Islamic schools.
Yeah, thank you. Another question from Indah. You want to deliver the question, please?
Yes, could you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, hello. I'm sorry, I apologize that I came to the lecture very late. It's such a pity. I would love to hear more about your lecture, to be honest. So let me introduce myself. My name is Indah. I'm a master's student, but I'm also working at a research program called Religious Communities and Sustainable Development. And we are doing a lot of research also on education, actually. And last time we are focusing on Islamic education, although in the Middle East region, quote unquote. I am interested in the funding topic, and because the direction that we are going towards is to the development. The notion of development itself is complex, right? What is the development from the religious religious community's perspective and the secular agency perspective? But anyway, I would like to know your opinion on that. So far, we know these Islamic schools in other region is allowing students in rural area to get education, to get educated, because there's no tuition fee, there's no money required to attend a school. So it is an agent, so to say, for development in certain countries. But in Indonesia, in my own country, I'm so embarrassed that I don't know that much history of our country. But so interesting that is actually a prestigious education institution in our country that only, so to say, like upper middle class families could go, or majority of that, correct me if I'm wrong. But how about, do you like have any research results or findings where actually it is also the case? Because I assume people in rural area are more religious. If there is like more Islamic schools are opening and it is free, and how about the funding from zakat? Isn't even possible, or is it even existence in our country? I'm sorry I'm babbling, but I would be interested in your, I don't know, views on that. Thank you again. Love
okay. Yeah, thank you, Indah, for those questions. Yeah, funding is always a problem. It's always an issue, especially when it comes to pesantren, for example, because pesantren tend to be self-sustained, right? In many ways, because they depend on the fees, and also they have their own businesses, like the pesantren where I lived at for 1 year in South Kalimantan. It has some fish ponds, it has, vegetable gardens, it has koperasi, it has all kinds of, businesses, small businesses, so which they deal, in the local community, or at least in the Kalsel area, but there's always a funding issue, so because sometimes it's not enough, even though the fees are actually quite low, but then it corresponds to the kind of facilities that the pesantren, the school can offer, right? So I guess the more you pay, and then the more facilities, the better facilities that you have, that you can get at the school, So if it's free or very low fees, then obviously you can't expect much, when it comes to facilities. They might not even have science lab, or maybe not even have a computer lab, for example, but they do get funding from the Ministry of Education. I don't think I'm not sure, I don't think they get from zakat or that, but of course, I mean, the land that they built the school is on Tanah Wakaf, donated land, so that helps. Actually, I have an interesting story actually about funding, right? Or about getting assistance from outside, right? When the pesantren gets an assistant, we get assistance from outside. So as I mentioned before, I was a Fulbright fellow when I based at this pesantren, right, in South Kalimantan. I was a teaching fellow, teaching English, and also doing some research. Right. So when I first came, actually even before I came to the pesantren, so there was quite a controversy, especially among the alumni network of the pesantren, because they heard the news that the pesantren is receiving a help, from the American government, from the State Department. And then they're like, no, this is not right. This person's going to come in and then corrupt the culture of the pesantren, and corrupt the minds of the students with all these Western secular values, blah, 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 So that was like a huge controversy, even before I came, right? So, and it so happened that, I think like the first 2 weeks, when I was there, so the pesantren celebrated its milad, ulang tahun, and then so of course all the alumni came to the school, right? So there were like hundreds of them, and then of course that was the main issue, right? So and then the Kiai, when he was addressing the audience, all these alumni, and he said that, yes, I know some of you have been complaining about the school receiving assistance from the American government, but let me assure you that none of that's going to happen. This guy's going to come in and just teach English, and this guy is not going to change the culture of the pesantren. He's not going to corrupt the minds of our students. And then he actually said, Mr. Azmil, can you stand up? So he actually asked me to stand up, in the middle. So I stood up. Look at him, he looked just like us. That's what he said. So I was like, and then after that, it was like, and it cooled things down after that, so people, like, oh, okay, at least he's not like some bully, blonde hair, blue eyes, here, like he looks just like any other Indonesian. So and he speaks Indonesian, so it's okay. And then so after the event, so some of the alumni came up to me, and they actually apologized. They're like, sorry, we were suspicious, we didn't know that, we thought, this is the first time that we ever received the assistance. So there's that kind of, when you receive funding, and especially this kind of assistance, and especially in a pesantren, strong tradition, strong culture, right? So they can be very protective of that, so it can cause a bit of tension, especially in my case, but it was okay after that. And then after, like, there's another Fulbright fellow who replaced me after that. And he's a white guy, came and there's no problem, right? So, but I guess because I was the pioneer, I guess I was the first one. So that took a bit of, I guess, learning curve, I guess, for the school. And then and after that, then it was okay. Yeah. So that was, yeah. So sometimes it's a bit, it's a bit tricky, funding is not just funding, right? So because especially when Islamic school, there are values that they want to protect, preserve, so, and then they're afraid that, I mean, I guess with a good reason, that sometimes fundings can come with strings attached as well, yeah, I mean, there are some changes they have to do in the pesantren, but I think like superficial changes, like when I came and there's like, oh, you need to have a sitting toilet, not like the regular squatting toilet, toilet, the jangkung, so yeah, like a sitting toilet, Western toilet, that's what they say, so you need to have Western toilet in the pesantren. So obviously there's no Western toilet in the pesantren, right? So the school actually had to install a Western toilet just for me. Yes, so this is the Fulbright requirement, so like you need to have a Western toilet, you need to have AC in the room, in the bedroom of where I stay. So there was no AC at all in the whole pesantren, right? Not even ceiling fan in the class, and you know how hot Kalimantan is, right? So so the first AC in the school is actually inside my bedroom. And the first Western toilet, or the only Western toilet, is actually in my house, or the house where I stay. So so those are the kind of, maybe they have to compromise a bit, it's like, okay, they have to build the Western toilet, they have to install AC, in my room. Yeah, but other than that, I mean, it doesn't really compromise their values, the deeply held values that they have. But they have to do some adjustments as well, because if they want to host me there for 1 year, this is what they need to do. Actually, they have to install shower as well. So that's actually 3 requirements. So shower, Western toilet, and AC, right? But the shower broke off after 1 week, because they just kind of like nailed it to the wall, and then the thing just fell off after 1 week. So I ended up using the bak mandi, so like, much more fulfilling than using the shower with no water pressure at all. So that's what, at least in my experience. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Azmil, to share a very interesting experience from the field. Well, Saskia, want to ask something or deliver comments? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I feel that the question of funding is a very big one, and we could dedicate a whole another seminar to the different strings that are attached to funding. But looking at the time, I was wondering if we should just collect like a last round of quick questions and then let you, Azmil, respond to them. Of course, I'd be curious to hear if you want to give us a quick update on the COVID situation and what that has done to the education that you've looked at, whether there's anything that come to mind that you think we should pay attention to. You probably also still had questions, so maybe we can throw them in there now, and then Azmil, you can pick and choose, and then give us a last round. Thank you.
Sure. Actually, I don't know that much actually about the COVID situation. Actually, at the beginning of the pandemic last year, Shafiq, maybe some of you know Shafiq Hashim, right, who is also the alumni of your institution. Is he a Humboldt or FU? Humboldt, right? Or both? Yeah. So
FU, but we had a joint. It's a joint program.
Yeah, and so he actually approached me at the beginning of the pandemic last year. He said like, I want to do this edited book on, about COVID and Islamic, something about COVID. I guess everyone shifted their research to COVID, but he asked me if I want to contribute a chapter on COVID and I guess the Islamic school and on that, but then that didn't go anywhere. Actually, I guess, he got sidetracked by other projects, so, but I guess like everyone else, I didn't really look at the Islamic education in COVID much, because I shifted to other things as well for the past 1.5 years, so not really. Actually, to be honest, I've been trying to move away, from Islamic education and to focus on other research areas, so I've been slowly trying to do that, in the past, at least past 3 years, I guess, since my book came out, so I feel like, okay, then maybe it's time for me to move on to other things. I think I've done enough of this Islamic education because I've devoted quite a few years of my life doing this, and I don't want to spend the rest of my career, on Islamic education. I want to do other more interesting research, topics. But like the movie Godfather, right? So like when you try to leave and they keep pulling you back in, So like the Al Pacino when the famous quote, right? So I feel like Al Pacino in the Godfather movie, like I try to and then I keep pulling back in because of the book, and then people know me by the book, and then I get speaking invitations, and I get like people invite me for research collaboration, and
yeah, these are the luxurious post-book problems. I wouldn't know.
I know. I know. I mean,
but I think that one of the effects that Ina and Dissa have found you have found in your research so far, right, is an even starker contrast of those who can participate in the digital discussion and those who just can't, right? So the divide has just been greater. But I think this has been the case in almost all school systems. So there's probably nothing Islamic about this. Ina, did you want to place a last question, looking at the time, or?
Yeah, if don't mind, maybe I will deliver my last questions and maybe quick answer. Like, I'm curious about the minority and majority settings in Indonesia and education system, which has given an influence to education system and transformation, and how it react in the landscape and so on. So in the contemporary, also there's huge bureaucratization on religion, and also it goes to the education sector, where, for example, women students especially, must wear veil to go to schools, or having morning pray duha, etc. I think it's phenomena that something you argue where both of state and society has transformed education. How do you see the tension here, especially during the rise of you see Martin Feminism say the conservatisms in Indonesia?
Yeah, I think I mean, you can even see even before that, the perda, and sometimes they like they force some districts and province, they can issue this kind of regulations, that forcing people to but I know, but this is the thing, there's always this kind of tensions, right? You always see in a country that as vast as Indonesia, and as complex and as diverse as Indonesia, which can be highly decentralized, but at the same time also centralized. So sometimes there's confusion, when it comes to jurisdictions, like this, but I don't know. You look at the Jokowi administration right now. Like I say, with especially appointing Gus Yakut, as the minister, the Menteri Agama, and then the banning of HTI and FPI and all those things. I think at least in a way, maybe it, I mean, you can see this rise of conservatism, of course, especially up until the 212, and Ahok and all that. I think that was the climax, and then, but I don't know, if this is an attempt by the Jokowi administration to sort of kind of reverse this Islamization tide, or making overtures. or is it because of, because NU now, is playing a big role in the Jokowi administration with the Ma'ruf Amin and now the Menteri Agama, that actually trying to push back, especially, like HTI, for example, these are the quote unquote enemy, right, of NU. So I'm not really sure, but like I say, you can have this kind of, but regulations or laws, but in the provinces, I think this is an issue with Indonesia because this kind of lack of supervision, and also the regional variety, the local influences, I think plays a big role, so we don't have the kind of highly centralized or very dominant central government like Malaysia, for example, Indonesia, like I said, the Kementerian Agama can have a rule saying like no, only Muslims can teach in madrasah, for example. But you go to NTT, you go to Flores, you go to Kupang, you find Christians, teaching in Islamic schools. So obviously defying the, what. But then when you look at the law, it doesn't say that that there's a undang-undang dosen and guru, whatever. You don't see there's no religious requirement there to teach in the madrasah. So apparently this is just something that maybe internally, Kementerian Agama say that only Muslims can teach in madrasah. Because when I go to the head office, the Kementerian Agama, and I ask people, they're like, yeah, only Muslims can teach in madrasah. Why would Christians, we allow Christians to teach there? But obviously that's not the case. So there's the rule, and there's a gap, when it comes to implementing, this kind of. So which I guess, for a researcher like me, it's quite interesting to observe, because obviously maybe there's lack of capacity, the state capacity, resources, or just don't care. I don't know. So. And even the local officials there, the people at the Kanwil Agama, for example, they're more influenced by the local sensibilities, the local culture, than what comes from the central government, because they're part of the local community there, so which I think is quite interesting to see this kind of, because obviously, as a Malaysian, and then I see what's happening in Malaysia is completely different, because you can see the central government is so dominant. Even you go to the grassroots, to the local level, even in the state like Kelantan in Malaysia, which is in opposition state for the long time, but you can see the influence of the federal government there is so strong. So even in Sarawak, in Malaysian Borneo, where it has regional autonomy. And you can still see, the strong hand of the federal government there. So, which is not the case in Indonesia.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pak Azmil, for answering all those questions. I believe there's still many questions, also me personally.
Maybe next time in Berlin physically, hopefully. I will make my annual visit, resume my annual visit to Berlin after COVID.
Restriction will be lifted.
Yeah, I can see here, I have a homework. Yeah, given by Prof. Hauben, so like some years ago.
Very nice. It was very pleasure to have you with us today, and also all the participants here, despite the different time zones. So
Yeah.
I think I will conclude the webinar today. Thank you all for attending. You have learned and you enjoy this online lecture. We also actually still have 3 more online lectures upcoming on education and religious education topic. Especially, we will have Dr. Yanwar Pribadi will talk on Sekolah Islam or Islamic school on 25 November, 2 days later. So we'll also look forward to see you and discuss more on the topic by then. Thank you very much. See you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Cheers.